I'm going to be giving away 10 TryHackMe subscriptions, so make sure to watch till the very end. This is a free cybersecurity analyst tool called Wazuh. It doubles as both an EDR and SIM, and no security analyst job is complete without a SIM. I've seen a few comments in my videos and Reddit on where does one get experience with SIM tools, what tools are free to use, and provide vital insight into an actual security analyst's day-to-day work. Wazuh! I'm going to go over TryHackMe's Wazuh module that gives you a taste of the power this tool has and explain how the functionality it provides relates to the security tools that I use in my current security analyst job. Now, this module is part of the SOC Level 1 learning path, and just like the security tool it covers, the module is 100% free. No subscription to TryHackMe needed. So let's get into it. This module starts off by explaining what Wazuh is. Because this module was made 621 days ago, Wazuh was just a baby back then, and it was considered an EDR. But now it's so much more. Just like Twitter, it has evolved from EDR to XDR. Now, the difference between the two is EDR is just endpoint detection and response, but XDR is extended detection and response. That includes not only EDR functionality, but also SIM functionality and so much more. This diagram here models how Wazuh works and how most security tools work, honestly. We have a central node acting as the management server that ingests all the logs and data from the endpoints that have the Wazuh endpoint agent installed on them. Simple, right? So read through and slap in those hand-hold the answers. Now, obviously, the Wazuh management server is already installed, and all you have to do to access it is fire up the attack box, and once it's up, click this Start Machine button, which will start up the Wazuh server and populate the IP address here. Once you've signed in, you're ready to move on. Now, agents can be deployed via the wizard, which makes it painfully simple to deploy to Windows, Linux, or Mac endpoints. If you were to set up an endpoint on your own, all you'd have to do is pick the OS, input the IP address or DNS entry of your management server, and stick it in a group if you've made one. By default, there's just the default group. Now click on through and input some more basic answers. Now the module highlights Wazuh's vulnerability assessment module, which can be set to scan endpoints at regular intervals. This image here shows that it's set to 5-minute intervals, and security events will then be compared to a security database of CVEs, otherwise known as common vulnerabilities and exposures, which is a list of publicly disclosed flaws on any particular system or software. Now, with Wazuh's settings out of the box, default settings, it's very noisy and will generate a lot of quote-unquote security events on everything from benign daily system updates to file deletes. Now, what flags as a security event is determined by Wazuh calls rule sets. These can be tuned and configured to reduce noise. Click on through and input the total security event seen. Wazuh is also capable of auditing and monitoring endpoints for compliance. Once the agent is installed on an endpoint, it scans the configurations of the endpoint, and you get a quick and dirty pie chart for any compliance regulatory bodies that you care about. That's pretty neat. The SIM and EDRs at my job don't even have that. As you can see here, Agent 001 is not even close to compliant. Shame. And the next section covers how to monitor logons, which is one of the most important things that you need to be keeping your eye on in a security operations center. Now, the configuration did change slightly from when this was made and now. So you're not going to find any security events with the ID 5710 in it, but you can find login logs. It points out where the alerts are stored on the management server in case you ever need to look at that. Honestly, there's no reason if you can just go through the GUI, but it does a nice job of showing you how each individual security event is going to have a table of neatly organized fields that you might be interested in. So the rule description, rule groups, the rule MITRE technique, which MITRE technique is huge. When I'm creating rules in our SIM, we always map it to a MITRE technique to give you an idea of what the hell the point of the rule is. Ensure that you click through these 2 handhold answers again, and then it covers how to set up Windows logs and how to set up Linux logs endpoints to ingest them into the management server. If you haven't heard of Sysmon before, there is a module on TryHackMe that covers Sysmon. Sysmon, or System Monitor, monitors your system and logs events. That's simple. This section of the module just covers how to forward the events logged by Sysmon to the management server. You have to tell Sysmon to monitor for the event of PowerShell, and to do that, you have to open up the Sysmon application, provide a aforementioned configuration file, provide screenshots of the command being executed to do so, and load the configuration file. Once Sysmon has accepted the configuration file, you open up Event Viewer, and you can drop down into Applications and Services, Microsoft, and finally Sysmon. Now, if you launch a PowerShell prompt on Windows Server, we can see a record of the PowerShell prompt being opened, kept within the event viewer. Pretty neat. So essentially what you're doing is you're telling Sysmon to monitor for a specific event to occur and making sure that event viewer is logging that event. Then you'll want to go into the configuration file for Wazuh on that endpoint, which is aptly named osec.conf. And you have to add the following snippet, Sysmon analysis. And once that's in that configuration file, then you just restart the agent, which the easiest way to do that is just to restart the system entirely. Then you have to go into the Wazuh management server to add Sysmon as a rule to visualize these events. Just because you configured the endpoint to send the data to the management server, that doesn't mean that the management server knows what to do with that data. You have to go in and make a rule that will pick up that data and notice that data and visualize it in a graph or on the GUI. You have to access the local rules.xml file. Once you add the correct syntax here, which it all looks very convoluted, but as you create more and more of these rules, it becomes very copy pasta, and then you restart the Wazuh management server, and that's it. You are now logging PowerShell prompts on the endpoint that you installed the Wazuh agent onto. It's that simple. So click through even more basic questions, and we're going to do the same thing on a Linux endpoint. And in this case, we're going to be monitoring for Apache 2's web server logs, and you have to configure the log collection service on the Linux server. There's a lot of things that will allow you to analyze log files with the Wazuh agent, some of which are Docker, FTP, WordPress, and so many more, approximately 900 apparently. And you can always make your own rules. So just like before, you have to add the little snippet of code into the osec.conf file that is on the Linux endpoint, which will then send Apache 2 log analysis information. In this case, it looks like it's sending syslogs. Save it, restart it, and then now you're ingesting logs from the Linux endpoint. Now, Wazuh also utilizes Auditd, which is a package that can be installed on Linux endpoints. Debian, Ubuntu, CentOS, those are Linux operating systems. So it goes through how to install the Auditd package. If you ever installed anything on a Linux endpoint before in your life, you'll know how to do that. Also, the Auditd plugin. apt-get is just a command line tool used for interacting with advanced package tools library. Just a way of installing stuff. So you're telling it to install from the library Auditd and the Auditd plugins as an elevated user using sudo. And then you also want to tell it to run on boot, so you don't have to manually boot stuff up. That's what the sudo systemctl enable Auditd services and sudo systemctl start Auditd service. So you're enabling it and you're also starting it to run. Out of the box, it's not going to be running the way you want it to. You have to configure it. You have to create a rule for the commands and events that you wish for it to monitor, because just because it's there doesn't mean it's monitoring anything. So for this example, they decided to set it up to monitor for any commands executed as root. And root is basically the almighty admin of the Linux operating system. You never want to run things as root. You typically want to run things as sudo so that you can log things and see which user is sudoing a command. If somebody's doing something as root, it's usually a bad sign, and it's very rarely done. And if it is done, shame. You can also extend it to monitor commands like tcp dump, netcat, or catting files like etc password. If somebody's catting files like etc password, you want to know about it, and you want to make sure that the person who's doing that has a very good reason, because you shouldn't be doing that regularly, if at all, ever. TCP dump and netcat are also two things that would not be typically happening. It's kind of an enumeration type of command. That's bad news bears if you see that. So to add the rules in the Auditd package, you have to open up the file and you have to append it. Nano is just a text editor, and then it's opening up the rules.d audit rules. You're going to append at the very bottom, exit always, and all that gibberish there. Then you have to inform the audits package of the new rule that you added and appended with this command here. It reads the new audit.rules file that was changed, and then you have to configure the system that is running the agent. So just like before in the previous two sections of Linux and Windows, you just have to append the osec.conf file and add Auditd log to it. That's provided there with that syntax. And now the management server is ingesting logs from the Auditd package on this Linux endpoint. Add a couple of more simple answers, and then we move on to another functionality that Wazuh has. APIs. Everything has APIs these days, right? I personally don't love using curl because it's too close to coding, but it covers in the top section how you have to generate a token to prove that you are legitimate and you should have access to the management server's juicy data. So you curl, get a token, you curl again with authorization with the token. Once it's verified, you can use the standard HTTP requests like get, post, put, delete to get stuff from the server. Below that, you'll see it's trying to get some statistics and important information about the Wazuh management server, like services that are being monitored, general settings, blah, blah, blah. But more easily, we can go into Wazuh's GUI. We can go into Tools and API Console, which it provides some pre-configured queries that you can run just by clicking the little arrow next to it. You just want to click into it and then click the arrow and it'll run it for you. And the queries are in the same exact format using web methods, get, put, post, as you would use with curl. So this is just to provide you access information using the APIs that Wazuh has functionality with. Go through and answer all these hand-holdy questions again, and then we move on to generating reports with Wazuh. So say you have a window of time that you want to spit out into a report, maybe for management or maybe for your own purposes for logging. You want to have a hard copy of it somewhere other than the console. Once you're in security events, there'll be a generate report button in the top right, and whatever you currently have on the console, that's what's going to be generated into the report. Once the report is generated, it gives you a report of the stuff that you're seeing on the console. Now, the Wazuh server as it stands doesn't have a lot of events, security events. So Wazuh does have a sample set that you can utilize to just generate a bunch of random data to kind of dig in and familiarize yourself with the platform. So if you go into settings and sample data, you just have to press the add data button and it'll take a couple minutes and it'll generate thousands upon thousands of alerts for you to dig into, get your hands dirty, and figure out how to use a SIEM XDR platform. You don't have to install any VMs. You don't have to configure any networks, although I will recommend doing that. There's no replacement to figuring out how to configure something from scratch versus having me talk about it or having you go into the Try Hack Me module and just messing around with it. You will learn some, but not as much as you would if you configured it. And as a junior security analyst, you'll most likely never be asked to installing and configuring a SIEM product from scratch. But if you ever want to be a security engineer or a senior security analyst, you'll need to know how to install and configure your software. Now, installing and configuring all that is a very dry process. Drier than yo mama's. But if you'd like to do that, check out John Hammond or Network Chuck, where they do a deep dive into how to configure this wonderfully free cybersecurity analyst tool. Something I wanted to point out that is actually covered in another Try Hack Me module that goes over how to create Wazuh rules. If you go into the rules section here, you'll see there's 3,148 rules. In my previous videos, I've talked about going in and creating rules in our SIEM solution. This is what I'm talking about right here. So as you can see here, I've opened up the 16th Wazuh rule. And basically my job is to create these XML files in the correct syntax that the SIEM can then read and will generate security events for the analyst to look into. So that being said, you will want to familiarize yourself with this at some point or another because it's going to help you in the long run as a cybersecurity analyst. As a junior analyst, you're not necessarily going to have to create rules immediately, but there are a lot of positions that will require you to at least be knowledgeable on how rules work. Because if you don't know how a rule works, then how are you supposed to even begin your investigation to see what the rule is trying to find? MITRE techniques can only help you so much if you don't know what exactly the rule is trying to find. Now, as promised, I'm going to be giving out 10 Try Hack Me 1-month subscriptions to 10 of you lucky folks out there. All you have to do is leave a comment down below, anything about how much you like WoW, I don't know. Make sure to subscribe and make sure to like the video. And the 10 winners are going to be announced a week from now. I'm going to be announcing the winners in the comments down below and also in my Discord. So if you want to join that, it might be a little bit easier to find out the winners. But yeah, that was it. The free cybersecurity tool that all people trying to aspire to become a cybersecurity analyst should get. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you in the next video.
How does it feel to treat me like you